Okay, so I live in northernish Canada, and about a year ago, some pretty strange stuff started happening. It all started one night when I started to hear Arnold, my pet pig, acting up downstairs. He never whines at night, but this night he wouldn't stop. Eventually, I went downstairs and called Arnold upstairs to come spend the night with me. He eventually stopped whining and we both went to sleep. I don't think much of that until about a week or so later when he was doing the same thing again. This time, when I tried to turn the lights on to go downstairs, it wouldn't turn on. Then I figured I would just use my phone light, but my phone wouldn't turn on either. So I used the flashlight I keep in the drawer to go and get Arnold and bring him upstairs. The flashlight being the only thing that worked will be relevant later. So about a month later, my neighbor, who lives in the cottage beside me, we are quite far apart because we both have big properties, so I didn't hear anything personally, told me that something had killed one of his horses. He heard it screaming as he was about to go to bed, so he grabbed his rifle and went to the barn to investigate. Upon arriving at the barn, he could hear all the other horses whining and screaming and an odd crunching sound. He opened the barn door with a flashlight and his rifle pointed inside, and as soon as he did so, the crunching noises stopped. All of the horses were very active and panicked in their stalls, except for Bailey, who wasn't making a sound, and seemed to be where the crunching noises were coming from. So my neighbor told me that he shouted, "Who's there?" And upon saying that, a creature sprinted out of the stall towards him. He described it as long-armed with human hands and feet, but long claws instead of fingernails. He said it ran on all fours, and like anybody would do, he panicked and fired multiple shots at the thing, which panicked it, so it turned around and sprinted up the stairs. Then it jumped out the window, over my neighbor, and ran off into the woods. He fired the rest of the magazine at it, but he didn't find a body or any blood in the morning. When he went to investigate the horse, he found that it had 4 deep slash marks in its neck, and was missing most of its upper right leg. Not only was the flesh gone, but so was the bone. After he told me that, I told him about Arnold had been acting and how my lights and phone didn't work, but my flashlight did. He said that his home lights wouldn't work either, nor would his gun light. All of the electronics that didn't work had computer chips operating them. Our house's electrical systems, my phone, and his tactical, multiple-mode flashlight all didn't work, but our simple flashlights that only require a piece of metal to touch another piece of metal to function worked perfectly fine. So we devised a system to detect the creature. It isn't anything too fancy. It's literally just night lights, and if they turn off, we know it's near because it's hooked up to our house's electrical grids. Anyway, one night about 2 months later from when it started, my nightlight went out, So I grabbed my MTAR-21 semi-automatic bullpup rifle. Yes, they are legal in Canada, and went downstairs with the computerless flashlight that I duct taped to the barrel. My tack light has a computer in it, and therefore doesn't work when it's around. As I was about to go down the stairs, I started to hear Arnold whine again, and I had noticed earlier that there was enough moonlight to vaguely see stuff without a flashlight. So I decided to turn off my super tactical duct tape light so I wouldn't scare the thing off and use Arnold as bait for it. At this point, I wasn't scared that it would be able to harm Arnold because I had an MTAR-21 in hand and I could see both Arnold and the front door from where I was lying down at the top of the stairs. So anyway, Arnold's whining increased in volume, and that's when I started to hear something climbing up the steps of the patio. Arnold just stared out the window and whined, and I could see it from my angle until it got really close. I heard it approach the door, and then I saw it. It was black and had huge, long arms. Because I was only using the moonlight to see, I couldn't make out much more than that, so I turned on the flashlight, and then its head jolted up towards the light. Then I caught a glimpse of the thin hair and white eyes with tiny black pupils, and the huge claws as it lifted its hand to shield itself from the light. I proceeded to fire multiple shots through the glass, shattering it, knocking the creature back, and then sending it running. I didn't dare move from that spot for a long time. I now no longer had a window, and I was pretty sure it could fit through. My ears were ringing, my eyes were adjusting, and the nightlight hadn't turned back on yet. I spent the rest of that night lying at the top of those stairs with Arnold, who I called up beside me, even after the light turned back on. After that, it started to get cold and it didn't bother me for the entire winter. The only problem is that it's getting warm again. I quite frankly don't want to ever see the thing again unless it's lying motionless with several holes in it. So what should I do? This story was told to me by one of my good friends, whose Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago, when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer vacation visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I've heard. My friend, Jessie, was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of parched bur oak trees. Jessie, being the oldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange, as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me. cold, as if she dunked in ice water. You know, that annoying scary story cliche of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her even when she looked around and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the kids to come inside. The true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point of her retelling the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me that the song was the exact same one she'd been singing from the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded? When I nodded, Jessie added, "It was like that, but a little clearer." Somehow that made it even worse. Jessie and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protests, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she had ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer, with antlers like dead trees and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny, humanoid body with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a clawed hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpeted floor. Clara woke up again and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what had happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on. The old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't fall asleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day. No arguments. She looked so shaken nobody dared protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of the skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes." "Grandma," said Jessie as the light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing the same song. You know, the lullaby you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago. 7 to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again, and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March, at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened?" Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yep. Tomorrow I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you. Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me turned me to stone. You think nothing will happen to you because you are white. But when you are in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution. I nodded yes. That night, I swore I heard radio static outside. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but I suppose if there is something to be learned from that story of the singing skinwalker, it's that there are things out there that we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experiences told me everything I need to know. What she saw truly horrified me, and all I can say is, I am grateful I didn't have to go through it myself.